Hi, welcome to the third episode of the Overcast podcast. Last episode, we talked about regulating AI and policymaking, and this episode, we're going to talk about privacy concerns related to AI and technology in general, and the issue of individual privacy versus state security, and like how AI technology like inflames this issue overall. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. That's a great introduction, Max. Thank you. Um, so, just speaking on, uh, you know, governments and corporate companies and whatnot, and AI and their overreach in our daily privacy-focused lives and everything like that.
Mhm.
There's an article here titled "From Shadow Profiles to Contact Tracing:
Mhm.
Qualitative Research into Consent and Privacy," which I think goes over this concept and these concepts very well. And it starts off with the idea of informed consent. Um, and it suggests that consent is maybe dead.
Mhm.
Any thoughts on that?
And well, I mean, to be fair, when I think of most people, when they see like a terms and condition page on like their phone, they kind of just scroll through it as fast as possible. Like it's some
Yeah,
inconvenience, and then they just, click accept. No one really has time, I guess, to read those. I mean, they are like 50 pages long, some of them, and the wording as well isn't very informative. You could think that some of them they seem almost like so complex they don't even expect you to read them.
yeah, they really do. I've
Yeah.
tried, but
Yeah.
I found it basically impossible.
Yeah. It's like, what am
Um,
I looking at?
yeah,
Mhm.
I've always found those. I don't if you've ever signed up on a website and it requires you, instead of just like clicking off a checkbox, it requires you to like scroll through
Yeah.
the entire terms and conditions,
Uh-huh.
as if that's like an indicator that I've actually been informed and actually read it.
Yeah.
And I always found those very funny because they kind of just seem more annoying than actual like informing the user of their terms and conditions and their rights on the platform.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and this article goes directly into that idea of about how like maybe consent is dead because um, this with online advertising and everything, it doesn't adequately protect individuals.
Mhm.
Um, and it talks about in the article that um, that effective data protection is first and foremost a matter of design and not of like of consent itself, because
Yeah.
we're it's basically impractical in face of all these AI machine learning algorithms around us that we can't be up to date and informed all the time,
Yeah.
which is what consent kind of requires. Like you need to know like what am I giving out, what am I taking in, right? And you can't
Yeah, that's
do
true.
that if it's constantly changing.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of like ghost updates you could think of. Like
Hmm.
your phone automatically updates all these apps without even telling you.
Yeah,
And you really have no clue of what's being added. And even like for apps that like do inform you, they usually just they'll send you like an email that you'll never read that like is links to some terms and condition.
yes. Speaking of that, actually, I had received an email today about an update to the Scene Plus terms and
Uh-huh.
conditions.
Okay,
Um,
wait. What's that?
it's just a movie points uh, plan, like air miles and whatnot, where you gain points
Okay.
when spending money. And I received an email about updating their terms and conditions, and I clicked on it to read like what actually changed. I wanted to see like what they did they change the points and how I earn points and whatnot. And honestly, I tried reading through it, and I don't know what the actual differences were. I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
It was just too obscure to
Wow.
see what the actual changes were. And even though they informed me, they sent me an email, they made it easy to go and read it. I still had no idea what actually changed because there wasn't like a change log. It was just like here are the new terms and conditions.
Mhm.
It wasn't like here's
Huh.
what actually is changing. So even by informing the user, you still have that problem of like, well, what actually are you doing with
Yeah.
my data? What data? And I think this ties in nicely with uh, the GDPR, which is the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which is kind
Mhm.
of the key regulation that has come in to protect people's like privacy. Um, which is like requiring websites and whatnot to make it as easy to withdraw and as it is to give consent.
Yeah.
Um, but even with this, like they talk in the article how even with this GDPR and companies are being fined more often, it still it doesn't do enough. It doesn't work.
Yeah. And why is that?
Well, like they 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 give some examples with like a lot of fines coming out with companies not following like the
Hmm.
regulations put out. So like they fined Google recently 50 million because of a flawed consent process for new Android users. And so
Hmm.
they just have these concerns that are constantly happening with court battles constantly coming up with uh, new issues basically every year from companies from Facebook and Google and all over the place that they don't even recognize. That it kind of just falls apart. And they talk about how like it's an ongoing process,
Hmm.
but it doesn't always work.
Hmm.
Um,
Even in the article, they talk about a law in California called the Californian Consumer Privacy Act,
mhm.
which basically mandates that people have a meaningful understanding of how their data is used. And that's, it's not very, like, not a very hard definition, right?
Yeah,
I think you could easily see how that
meaningful.
that wouldn't really do much. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think yeah, just going from this the article talking about how consent is basically dying or is dead.
Hmm.
Um, Goes into they have six focus groups in Australia, and they go into studying how to change this and how to fix this and what actually is the issue and some other cases relating
Yeah.
to that. So I think we should look at those. So just from those six focus groups, there's an interesting consensus that they kind of got out of us. So the idea was to look at this was during the COVID-19 outbreak, and they had focus groups over Zoom, and they had basically uh, tasked participants to mimic like a user flow when
Uh-huh.
using smartphones and signing up to new apps to kind of see like what they do when like when they're tasked with the consent terms and conditions coming up.
Okay.
And basically they found that like most people like we talked about do not read the terms and conditions, um, and that they did not think many of the participants did not think that informed consent was unfixable, but that um, each group kind of came up with a different way to fix it.
Hmm.
So one of the group's solution was basically just ensure that people actually read it, which we talked about, um, that kind of idea of scrolling through it and actually having to read it.
Yeah.
Um, and oftentimes the researchers concluded that that doesn't really uh, force you to, but there's also some other suggestions from another group that you would have to maybe type something in from the terms and conditions that you had previously read.
Hmm.
Um, and so they talk about how it's not like an all or nothing approach to consent.
Yeah.
And then the another group that I found really interesting was that they call it the try before you buy consent model, which would basically give people like a better sense of what they may value of the app. So basically give them a chance to use the app without like it um, signing up and collecting all their data.
Hmm.
And then they kind of just end this process off with the recognizing that there are limitations to informed consent and that uh, individual informed consent and that the law would need to step in with those regulations. We talked about the California Act and the European Union's GDPR.
Yeah, and it's important to note that like the people in the study were very like focused on transparency, and they
Hmm.
wanted to know like more about like the companies collecting their data, and like not necessarily very interested in the ways that the app functions, but rather like the actual data being collected by them, because that's all the different types of data that are collected for a user. Like uh, you could see how that slowly infringes on privacy if if the users aren't aware of the data that's being collected at all.
Yeah, yeah. If you like your
Yeah,
location data is always being supplied,
yeah,
even when you're not using the app or if it's
yeah, and
using
you
your
probably don't
contact.
even know it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Um,
it might not even say in the terms and condition, right?
yeah, it might not even, or if it even if it does, it may be so obscure and hard to understand that
Yeah.
you just wouldn't be able to tell.
Hmm.
Um, and so, just going forward now and through this article, there's four different like case studies that they looked at as well.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think we can start with the first one, which is very interesting. Has a very interesting name, shadow profiles.
Shadow profiles.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and so that's basically uh, like social media companies, or not even necessarily social media companies, but just companies creating like a profile on someone that may or may not exist, right?
yeah,
Like just
basically,
based on data from other people
if
that
people
they
don't even
know.
like use the platform. Like, it can create profiles, and
Hmm.
you might not even use, Facebook,
Yeah,
for instance, right? But Facebook's creating a profile of you.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I think there's a really interesting statistic in here, which I think we could talk about
Uh-huh.
on Twitter. And so I just want to raise this question, basically, like, so there's a 95% um, predictive accuracy to predict an individual's like character without
Hmm.
even like that person using Twitter based on just a number of individuals that they share like a social tie with. What
Okay.
do you think the actual number of people that they need to figure out who you are is?
And so this is like people that they have data on, like within
Yeah,
their
like,
like app or whatever.
you don't use Twitter,
Yeah.
but you have contacts that do, and they can, within a
Mm.
95% uh, a potential accuracy, basically predict you.
Okay. So this is like if you have an account and like you have your contact information like available to Twitter to see, but you don't really use the app. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah, you could be,
Okay.
you could not be using the app. You could like not even have an account. You could just be like, you may just click on a tweet that your friend sends you, and from just doing that, um, it kind of Twitter kind of builds a profile of
Oh,
like this
okay.
person. Like, you don't even need an account. So how many people do you think you
Um,
need to predict with a 95% certainty who you are?
well, let's put up a poll for the listeners.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Very
yeah,
interested to see the results
yeah.
of this.
Check out the screen. There should be four options. I wonder what you guys will think about like yeah, how many contacts do you think will be enough to like get that 95% accuracy? So pause the video and answer that, or
We'll give you a couple seconds to think of it.
yeah. And so Jonathan, what is the correct answer?
This I found this really crazy. It's only 8 to 9 individuals contacts to figure out who you are.
Wow.
You only need 8 to 9 people to, within a 95% predictive accuracy, to figure out who you are. You don't have an account, but within just figure out just 8 to 9 people around you, they
That's
can figure
crazy.
out, basically, they can build a profile of you.
Wow.
I was
Crazy.
thinking way more.
Yeah, definitely. Holy.
um,
And this was done with a data set of almost 14,000 users, so uh, it's it's not like there is like decent it's a decent test.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think it's a really cool phenomenon that they brought up about it, of how it actually works. Um,
Wow,
and
that's crazy.
yeah, it's basically, we tend to socialize with people that are like-minded, like
Mm,
like-minded others, and this makes it basically possible to do this shadow profiling, which is very scary almost.
yeah. It
Um,
because yeah, you I think there's a lot of people that, try to stay anonymous online, but still have like accounts like
yeah,
on these websites, but they probably don't have no profile picture, they don't post anything.
mhm.
But the fact that like Twitter can predict like so much about a person just based on like them linking their contact information is crazy.
Yeah, yeah. They even raised, basically, um, that exact example in the article, where I want you to like just imagine 5 imaginary friends. I know you
Hmm.
you may not have that. You may not have 5 but think of five imaginary friends, you know?
Okay, okay, sure. I'll think of
Sorry
it.
for that. Okay, now imagine four of them are on a social network like Twitter, right? The
Hmm.
fifth does not want any social contact, like social media contact, like you talked about. Um, now this fifth person can still be revealed based on this information because it's the four other friends. They may not be as certain,
Hmm.
but you could still be revealed. And this is just what the people, most people, think of like this would be like social media being able to do this should be, like unethical. It's borderline illegal,
Hmm. Yeah,
right? Like you don't
yeah,
have an account, you don't have consent, you didn't give any consent for them to build a profile on you, but it's still um, they can and they are.
wow.
Um,
Yeah, it's crazy. It's almost like they're building an account for you
yeah,
without, yeah, and you obviously can't consent to that. You don't even use the app.
yeah. Like if you don't have social media, like if you don't have any, like you do that for a reason. So this is
Yeah,
basically going against your wishes.
yeah, yeah. You probably want to do that because you're concerned about your privacy, right? You value
Mhm.
your privacy, and it's if Facebook can do that, uh that's a huge violation of privacy for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and this kind of idea of shadow profiles, I think, is just one part that people think of when they try to like disconnect from social media.
Hmm.
That it's still kind of there, and I think another part is another case study that this article goes into, which is eavesdropping. And this is basically like the word says, basically eavesdropping on people's like conversations.
Hmm.
Um, so there isn't as much as they talk about here. There isn't as much um, like information around like people or companies actually doing this, but that it is possible.
Okay, yeah.
Um, now
I guess
we
through
yeah, there. I think you might have an idea of how.
yeah, through like I would imagine through like voice assistants like Amazon Echo
Yeah, that would
or
be one
or
way.
Siri. Yeah.
Yeah, like I have a Google Home in my house. It has to be always listening for me to activate it, right? So
Hmm.
in some sense, it kind of always is. They kind of always are. Um, but another way that was very different in this article brought up is that they can use the accelerometer in your phone to pick up your speech.
Wow. How does that work?
Yeah. So
What?
your microphone can be broken, it can be turned off, whatever, but the accelerometer, based on the vibrations that it basically can capture, like in motion, like the vibrations of motion of speech, it can, you know, capture your audio and make it uh, discernible to speak to volume and whatnot. Like you can hear
Jesus.
it. And yeah, they don't say that any company is doing this,
Uh-huh.
thankfully, but they admit that it is possible, and that it has been shown to be done.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's just one way. Like, even you might be conscientious about your microphone being on mute all the time and whatnot, or even like physically disconnected or something.
Hmm.
But you got no Google Homes in your house, but they could still kind of pick up what you're saying.
Wow, that's
Um,
crazy.
yeah. And this I think ties in directly to like government surveillance
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because even if the companies are not, if it's shown that it's possible, it's shown that it can be done, then you always kind of worry about like, well, how do I know it's not being done by someone else?
Yeah. And
Um,
I guess that's like directly related to the issue of like national security versus like personal privacy, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's kind of like
definitely.
an age-old debate. There's people on both sides,
Hmm.
and there's positives for each viewpoint as well, which is why it's so hard to like there is no um like definite answer of what's more valuable. It really depends on the person. But um I think a lot of people know of the story of Edward Snowden uh in 2013 when he was working in Hawaii and he uncovered that the NSA was like spying on like millions of Americans. And this is like, a real thing.
Hmm.
Uh, it's not just like,
It's quite
uh,
recent.
yeah, it's not like a hypothetical about like what could go wrong. It's like something that has actually happened
Yeah.
and could still be happening now because, with what happened to him, he was a whistleblower and he got cast out.
Hmm. Yeah. Like even like I brought the example of accelerometer. Like even though no companies are using that we know of, with the example we brought of Edward Snowden talking about how the NSA, is spying on everybody. Um, there's nowhere to say that they're not still doing it,
Yeah.
and we've shown that you can do it with your accelerometer. Who knows? Maybe they got other ways to do it with
Hmm.
something else as well.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, yeah, and like um, with the idea of like the NSA spying on people, um, I think that's something that like really interesting because this was a case study that they talked about in the article is that like people have varying different perspectives on what's allowed
Yeah.
on like government surveillance, and some people
Hmm.
have the idea that it's just like we have no choice. It's a government agency, regardless if we like it or not. They're gonna have our data. They know when
Yeah.
we're born. They have our birth certificate. Like they're gonna know all this. It's over. It's
I
we
see.
you don't want to participate. Oh, too bad. And then you have other, like it isn't, you shouldn't be spied on. It's none of the government's business. They
Hmm.
shouldn't be, non-consensually accessing your information without you knowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and this is definitely something that we need people like Edward Snowden, which, even though he was basically casted away and never to return, um, we're kind of grateful to know that
Yeah.
people out there that are actually, I guess like genuine.
Uh-huh.
Sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense because, I obviously thought what NSA was doing was unethical
Yeah, like
because,
literally
they didn't have the
illegal,
consent. Yeah, literally illegal.
unconstitutional. They had to do them, yeah, just so we don't get out of there. We get it out there. This these practices were illegal at what they were doing. They
Yeah.
did not go through the proper channels. Everything was backroom, hidden from the public of what they were actually doing here. Yeah, and that's one part of government surveillance that this talks about and we've talked about. And I think a big part that this article talks about as well is on contact tracing
Hmm.
during the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, and they talk about a variety of different COVID-19 like tracing apps
Yeah.
that were kind of rushed out to to track and prevent the spread of the virus. Um, and they just talk about how um, the consent that was there was rarely a notice on consent to these apps.
Hmm.
Um,
And they also kind of seemed like a requirement in a way.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like if you wanted to, like, board flight, for example, you would need to use the app.
hmm yeah. You had to basically, yeah. If you wanted to do your daily lives, you kind of had to rely and trust and be
Hmm.
forced to use it.
Yeah.
Um, what they talk about, kind of increasing the risk of like your data being, who knows where your data could go. Like it could be illegally collected and shared and sent off without you knowing, um,
Uh-huh.
because they were rushed so quickly because we were trying to get a hold of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the major concerns, like what caused this, is that the researchers involved had concerns with was basically the private companies that were developing the apps, which would have a like reason to not properly disclose data collection and how like
Hmm.
everything's being shared. Like if we already know that social media sites create shadow profiles and um, eavesdropping and doing all these other things, how can we be so certain that other companies won't use it to try to make some more money?
Yeah, that's true.
Data is
Because
so valuable, right?
yeah. Yeah. I and I wanted to know that, uh, the participants in the study, like, they were shown like this example
Hmm.
and they generally didn't really have issues with it because of the like the use case of the apps
Yeah.
being that it's for protecting like their livelihoods in a way, uh, and they did have one issue of concern, which was that that they had like a limited knowledge of how the app worked and the actual data that was collected from it, which is you know cu- basically the exact same issues they had with like the other examples that they were shown.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think a big part of that is because of the idea that um, we knew, or we hoped, right, that this it wasn't. We knew wasn't going to last forever. Like
Hmm.
the pandemic was going to go away. We would be able to delete the apps at some point.
Yeah,
The
sure.
data, it's not going to be. We're not going to have to worry about it. It's not our daily. At the time, it was our daily, use, but it wasn't going to be daily forever.
Hmm.
And so that kind of alleviates the idea of, okay, we'll give it the data to help do whatever to help the cause, stop the
Hmm.
spread and whatnot, to get it over with, right?
Yeah, like
Um,
we're not consenting to using this forever, basically.
yeah,
Hmm.
which is much different compared to the NSA kind of just spying on you without you
Yeah,
knowing forever,
yeah,
because
yeah, exactly.
you never gave it up, and you never uh, got to give it back, like take it
Yeah.
back.
Uh-huh.
Um, so this is a different case, but still an important case to look at.
Hmm.
And I think this from these like case studies, they kind of want to look at uh, how like legal frameworks needed to like adapt, how
Hmm.
they need to adapt to the complexities of the digital world, and how digital services need to be designed in a way that enhance user understanding and
Hmm.
control, which is what these this whole article is basically showing, all the different ways that we're kind of getting it wrong so far.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
they wanted to draw some conclusions, basically, right?
yeah.
And
Um,
it mainly just revolved around consent. They wanted to talk about how consent relates to the law, the supporting role of design, and just a problem of fixing individual consent in general.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Many participants just want simplicity and clarity in design,
Hmm.
and that is basically and it's not it's one participant in the study basically straight up said, it's not something, the consent is not something that you can just like skim through. It's
Yeah.
something that you kind of have to work on and make sure that it's clear and concise and easy to understand for everyone.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly, because it's important, right?
Yeah.
And that's not really the way it's treated right now.
Hmm. Yeah, so there's just another example of how they want to look at fixing individual consent. And this kind of came into response of Apple a couple of years ago, I believe, basically giving users the ability to kind of opt out of tracking by apps. And this is where Facebook kind of got all crazy with being like, if I'm not able to have personalized advertising and personalized tracking, then I'm going to lose billions of dollars.
Hmm.
And this, they talk about how Facebook's fear here was based on the presumption that millions of people would choose privacy, um, and basically, in other words, that Apple was giving people the genuine opportunity to withhold consent. So
Hmm.
this is a way forward to giving people actual
Yeah.
individual consent themselves, um, and this played a role also in the development of Australia's contact tracing app, which didn't touch on quite so much previously, but they basically allowed you to um, do the same kind of idea of opting out with the consent with that app there.
Yeah.
Um, and this is just one idea of how to like how consent law and design of companies coming together can move things forward.
Hmm. Yeah, and uh, I know Apple has been praised as like one of the major tech companies that actually somewhat like pledges like a path forward for privacy laws.
Hmm.
But even Apple, like obviously they're not perfect, there's a lot of security uh, like breaches that do exist. Well, given that there is no like laws and regulations for these kind of things in general,
Hmm. No,
like
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
like for shadow profiles and eavesdropping, which we talked on earlier. In the conclusion of the study, the participants were basically asked how they felt about all of these things, and they basically said that these methods should be completely banned, like made illegal or like outlawed.
Very interesting take. Yeah, I feel like many companies would not like that outcome, especially
Yeah,
the big
because
advertising giants.
most of these companies directly profit from these
Hmm.
like data collection methods.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes more sense because Apple tries, or the difference that Apple tries to hold themselves as the more privacy focused um, company.
Yeah, that's sort of how they market themselves.
Yeah, and it's shown that they actually are compared to others.
Yeah,
I think that's all for today. Um,
exactly.
yeah, I think this study has given us a lot to think about. Regarding the future of privacy and consent and governmental and corporate overreach. Um, I think we'll see you guys the next time in our final episode discussing issues with automated bots in the internet and how AI and chatbots like ChatGPT give rise to spreading misinformation,
Hmm.
and specifically addressing the dead internet theory. So stay tuned.